Welcome back to another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Today, I have a special guest. His name is Martin Toomey from Offshore, let me say this right, Offshore Consulting Group, LLC. And I first learned about Martin on Twitter. We've been engaging a bit on Twitter, talking about second passports, second residencies, incorporating offshore, moving abroad. And I thought he'd be a great guest to have on to talk a little bit more about what people's options are for relocating and creating greater options for themselves and internationalizing themselves. So, Martin, welcome to the podcast. How's it going, man?
Doing great. Appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to kind of educating your audience a little bit about all the different options available. Obviously, we'll focus on LATAM, which is honestly my favorite part of the world anyways. So it worked out really well that you do this podcast.
Exactly. And yeah, we'll keep it focused on Latin America, but I also think that comparisons are really cool and to see sort of what your options are on a worldwide basis. I know you do a little bit with Portugal, with Georgia, with Mexico. And so we can sort of compare and contrast a couple of them while also, yeah, having a focus on Latin America. I'm in Mexico right now. I've done one of the Mexico residency programs as well as a couple other residency programs. So I'm pretty well versed in this stuff, but as you know, you can always learn more. So the way I wanted to start was actually just to get a little bit more background on yourself, how you got into this stuff, what your story is.
So in 1996, I joined the U.S. military. I was in the Marine Corps. Highly deployable unit. We actually spent quite a bit of time down in South America before it became quite the lovely place that it is now. We also did some stuff in Africa and Eastern Europe. I ended up getting out of the Marine Corps after 4 years, but I wasn't ready to be done with the military, so I actually went to the Army. And I went to Special Operations Group, and we spent even more time down in South America, at least until Iraq and Afghanistan kicked off. And then obviously most of our time was spent there. But what I'd learned in my time in the military was, all of our governments and media and everything else tries to paint all these other countries, excuse me, as dangerous places. And if you go there, you're going to get robbed, you're going to get shot or killed. And what I learned from actually traveling to these countries and hanging out with locals and going to local establishments is, for the most part, all around the world, people are the same. They want to take care of their families. They want to work a decent job. They want to have some time off to hang out with their family and their friends. And essentially, they're all good people. Now, I'm not saying that there's not bad people in the world, but the majority of the people that you will interact with in any country are going to be good people who aren't looking to hurt you or rob you or anything else. So getting over that fear of traveling and then trying to convince some of my friends that were in the military with me that, it wasn't this big scary thing, and getting them to travel with me as well was really eye-opening. So when I got out, I got into real estate and a little bit of financial management. I started working with high net worth real estate clients. And during conversations, I'd sell a building for them. They had, $1 million, $1.5 million or something like that to reinvest. And I always like to throw out the option, well, have you ever looked outside the U.S.? Because what I found is there's a lot of safer investment options overseas. In some countries, your property rights are actually better than they are in the U.S. We don't have to deal with things like the eviction moratoriums and whatnot that we've had to deal with in the U.S. for the last 2 years. And to be honest, the ROI is much, much higher in a lot of these countries. So I started helping a lot of my real estate clients invest overseas. And then that led to, residencies and trying to look at citizenships and offshore bank accounts. Next thing I know, that was half my business, was helping my real estate clients diversify and mitigate risk by moving offshore.
Hmm.
So after about 3 years of doing that, I formed a company, Offshore Consulting Group LLC. And I chose a horribly ridiculous long name, I know, but it works really good for Google SEO. So formed this company, and that's, I still do real estate and commercial real estate, and I still own some commercial real estate buildings here in the United States. But my primary focus now is actually offshore strategies and solutions for people. And I don't service just the high net worth individual community. I've actually got a couple options for normal, mom and pop, moving out, retiring, pensionista, vista, things like that. Like I
Hmm.
have a $1,500 option that for most people will get them enough information to be able to go file the documents and everything on their own. Um, and then obviously I have the bespoke options where, we handle pretty much everything, and we might send a paper to you for a signature or something like that, but everything else is handled. So it's just a service that provides a safe, secure way of starting your offshore journey, because unfortunately there's a lot of scams in the space, and you think you're sending your 2,500 or $5,000 or whatever it is that they're advertising to get your residency docs, and they end up disappearing, closing up shop. So, and that's one of the other reasons that I started this, because I heard from so many people that were getting scammed. So I had to come out and do my own thing, just, if nothing else, just to help protect some of those people. So that's kind of how I got started, and now it's turned into a full-time business.
Definitely makes sense. And so, for some context, you're based in Arizona now. I'm sure that's been, it's been booming for real estate probably since the '90s. And so, when you were working with, some couple that's just trying to buy a house in Scottsdale or whatever, and then you bring up the idea of buying a second home abroad, in Latin America, something like that. How does that even come about? How does that conversation go? What is your sort of what did your client avatar look like back then, and has it changed?
So I never actually did residential real estate. I never worked with clients that were just buying a single family home. The ones that did, I mean, they were buying large portfolios of them for investment purposes. So I
Hmm.
was working with clients that's the only real estate that they owned other than their primary residence was investment properties. So they'd buy a portfolio of 10 or 15 single family homes to short term rental, or they would buy large commercial buildings, buy businesses and whatnot. So it's a much
Hmm.
easier transition into the conversation of, well, these returns look pretty good, but if we went and did this down in Medellin, Colombia, or we did this in Mexico City or Tulum, your ROI could be this, and I think it's safer because of that. So it made for a really good segue into the conversation.
Okay, this is interesting because I didn't know that we were going to talk about real estate in this interview. I thought it would be more just pure residency, but this is actually really good because I feel like there's not a lot of people. I'm American as well. I'm Canadian American, and I've always been interested in buying a property in Latin America, and I haven't been able to find too much content out there about sort of how to do it. Do you set up a U.S. LLC and then use that U.S. LLC to buy the property in Latin America, or do you set up like a local, like Colombian LLC equivalent? You know what I mean? It's a very it starts getting complicated real quick, and then of course like it's an interesting topic. So how does someone get started, or what are some of the fundamentals of buying property abroad in Latin America as an American?
So that really depends on the country, and that depends on your end goal. If you're looking to acquire properties just for cash flow and possible appreciation in the future, um, a lot of countries will allow you to own property in the name of an LLC. Some Latin American countries won't. If you're looking for citizenship by investment, Colombia is a perfect example of this. You buy $250,000 US dollar
Hmm.
equivalent of real estate, you're going to
Hmm.
get your citizenship in Colombia in just a few months. But in order to do that, you need to purchase that home in your personal name. You cannot buy it through
Right,
an LLC.
right, right.
Yeah, and that actually gives you some tax incentives on your U.S. taxes as well by purchasing real estate overseas. So it's a way to mitigate some of your tax burden as well.
Okay. So we'll transition into the residency and citizenship stuff, which I'm definitely very, very interested in. But let's start with just buying property. Like, let's say you're in like Mexico or Guatemala. I'm sure it's tough because there's like 20 different countries in Latin America. But let's just say you wanted to buy a property somewhere, you saw something pretty cheap, and you weren't interested in like the residency or citizenship benefits. How would you go about buying that property? Would you do it with US LLC? Would you just do it in your own name? How would that work?
So again, it depends on the country. Mexico, you can actually own through an LLC, either an American or a Mexican LLC. Um, but it's not so much. It's not like the U.S. where it's such a litigious society where everybody's sue happy. Um, so that's the biggest reason for holding property in an LLC in the U.S. is to protect your personal assets in the event of a lawsuit.
Hmm.
The LATAM isn't built that way. That's not how their system of laws is structured. So a lot of the times for my clients, I don't even recommend putting it in an LLC for down in LATAM for the countries that that's actually available for. But the biggest thing is work with local professionals. Find a good lawyer team that uh, you trust that you can work with that's actually
Hmm.
responsive.
Yep.
And then the other thing that Americans are not really aware of when they're going down there to shop for properties, real estate agents in the U.S. and real estate agents in LATAM are very, very different things.
True.
That it, if you're used to an American style of real estate agent where you can call them at 9 o'clock at night and they're going to pick up their phone and they're going to meet you at the property at 8 a.m. on Sunday morning and they're really professional and everything else. That's not LATAM real estate agents. Not that they're not good people, but they don't. It seems like they don't take their job near as seriously. They're not quite as bend over backwards as the American real estate agents are.
I get that, and I've definitely worked with some good people in Latin America on different things that are responsive and whatnot. Finding them is an interesting question, and I do want to come back to that because I want to ask you like, how do you scale your business in terms of like finding good people that you can work with that can take care of paperwork and stuff on the ground. But we'll come back to that when we get to more of like the residency segment and whatnot. Um, so would you say that, it's important to set up like a local bank account in the country first, or when everything's like good and signed, are you sending money like straight from the States? I'm sure you've come across a lot of horror stories where the transfers get blocked. You try to send like 100 grand from the States and it's just very difficult to actually send the money to the person. Things and it's a long process to get those sort of transfers approved. It's not like that.
Mm-hmm.
How do some of those sort of logistical steps work in your experience?
So I always recommend attempting to get a local bank account. Unfortunately, unless you have residency, a lot of countries it's very difficult to open a bank account.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons I always advise. Even if you're never going to use it, even if you never think you'll leave the U.S., if you're going to be buying properties in a country, it's worth it to get your residency there. To be able to just move through the process a lot easier. Open bank accounts, um, pay whatever payment management system that they're using down in that country. It just gives you easier access to all of that. And I always recommend third party non-biased fiduciary. So a lawyer or something like that is actually going to hold the funds until all the contracts completed, everything's signed off, and then they'll actually transfer funds.
Yep. Makes sense.
So
Because
that
I
way,
think
that lawyer can verify to both sides of the party that money has been received. It makes the sellers feel a little bit safer, and it makes the transaction a little safer for my clients.
definitely makes sense. I mean, I've looked at opening like a Scotiabank bank account in Mexico. Doesn't seem too hard. Um, But then, like, so let's just say I wanted to buy a property in Mexico. I would basically transfer like a huge, like, let's just call it 100K to my Scotiabank Mexico, and then from there to like the lawyer fiduciary, and then from there to the end buyer, I guess. So a couple steps.
Yeah.
Would that make sense?
And it's really not that much different than the U.S., where you're going to put earnest money down in a title company. Title company is going to hold your money, and then if you're paying cash for the property, then the day of you're going to bring in a check or you're going to do a wire transfer. Wire transfers is the most common now, so it's really not that much different. But instead of a title company, you're using a lawyer.
Makes sense. So now let's talk a little bit about like the returns that you can generate and the opportunities that you're seeing in Latin America. I think probably one of the big differences is that in Latin America, they just don't have as much access to debt and they don't have as much access to capital. And so cash is king. And so what I would imagine is that there's just not that many eligible buyers that have the means necessary to buy a property at any given time. And I think what I've seen just anecdotally is that properties that are for sale, even in like red hot markets like Playa del Carmen or Medellin or whatever, still sort of weirdly languish on the market for like an entire year for whatever reason. I've heard that, it's relatively easy to buy, but it can be hard to sell. I guess that's sort of an aside. My other thought would be like who are like yes, you could go sort of the Airbnb or short-term rental route in a lot of these markets, and that should hopefully be profitable, if not a little crazy day to day. But if you were to just like buy sort of like a high-end apartment and then try to rent it out, I feel like there's just not a lot of people in Latin America that can pay $1,000, $1,500 US for that apartment, other than like other gringos basically. So like who are you able to rent to? What are the cash flows looking like? Like what are the cap rates looking like? What are some of the opportunities that you're seeing? Is it residential or is it a different segment of the property market?
So it's primarily residential. We're doing all short-term rentals, so all Airbnb, all VRBO. And the reason for that is it's just the ROI is a lot higher. And like you said, there's not too many people that are going to rent an apartment for over $1,000, $2,000 from the local population. But that also brings up something else that we really try to take into account when we're doing our property acquisitions. Is we want to really look at the local economy. We do not go into any of these smaller cities, any of these non-tourist cities and whatnot, because we don't want to destroy the local economy. If you start buying up buildings in, you know, a regular Mexican town or Colombian town or Guatemalan town, um, and you're paying, U.S. dollars for something, you're driving up the costs, and within a few years, the locals can't afford to live there. And that's the last thing that we want to do. I mean, all of us love Latin America, so the last thing we want to do is destroy it and turn it into, gringo land. So we restrict ourselves to the high tourist cities to begin with, and then we just ensure that what we're doing isn't affecting the local population. I mean, obviously, no matter what we do, it's going to have an effect because we're bringing people in that have U.S. dollars to spend, or English pounds or euros to spend. So it can be a benefit for the local economy having all that money come in, but it does give a few difficulties for the locals as well, particularly in terms of housing. So we're looking
Okay.
at ROIs for short-term rentals at least 30%. And you're not going to find anything like that in
Wow.
the U.S. Even if you do short-term rentals in the U.S., it's hard to hit that number, and there's just a lot more risk with doing any of that in the U.S., especially the last couple of years when the eviction moratorium was going on. That scared off a lot of investors, a lot of my clients, and that's why we started moving overseas so much.
Hmm.
Cap rates are all over the place, and you're paying cash for a property anyway, so. Um, but it can be very, very profitable. And we usually do funds, so we'll do a collection of money from several clients, and we'll purchase entire apartment buildings for the most part.
Oh wow.
And then go and renovate. We did that in Medellin. That was a really really good project. We bought 2 buildings down there. I'm going to be down in Playa del Carmen at the end of March. I'm doing my citizenship paperwork, but I'm actually looking at some buildings. It's a working trip. So I'll be down there looking at some buildings there. We had a building in Mexico City for a little while that was really good, but we just got a stupid good offer one day, and it made sense to our investors to let go of it. So
Okay. Yeah, it definitely makes sense. So how like turnkey would one of these properties be? Because I'm a younger guy, I'm flexible. You're a badass army guy with tattoos. So maybe we're more predisposed to going into frontier markets, even though like Playa or Medellin isn't really that frontier. But like how do Miss Mom and Pop engage in this market where they don't speak the language? They're interested in the returns. They're down to work with intermediaries that can make it easy. How turnkey can you make it for them?
extremely, like, I'll send them a package in the beginning saying this is the project, this is how much we're going to spend on it. Um, this is how much we're going to put into it for renovation, and this is our expected returns. If they agree to it, they sign the paperwork, transfer some money over, and then quarterly I tell them how their investment's doing, and they never once have to worry about anything. It's extremely turnkey. But at the
And
same
I
time, I've
think
got clients that they want to be hands on. They want to come down to Mexico. They want to stay in it. They want to, they'll come down and be like, it'd be really cool if we built a porch off this side here, and then you could see the sunset over the ocean. It's like, okay, cool, let's build it. So it's everybody's got their own way of doing things.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And I think one of the cool things to point out is that renovations are probably much, much cheaper in Latin America due to less, what's the word, zoning restrictions, and
Oh
then
yeah,
just cheaper cost of labor,
labor and materials.
where you can get a guy to work on your house for pretty cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, if you want to build even just a kitchen in Arizona, you redo a kitchen is going to be 100 grand. But like you could outfit like a whole building in Latin America for I would imagine some small fraction of that.
Usually about 20%.
Wow.
So
So
I mean, if you're
renovation.
doing high end finishes, it'll be more like 50%. But I mean, that's still a significant cost savings.
Yeah.
And we tend to, I don't, not overpay our workers, but we're above market for sure.
Hmm.
Um, and that just helps us, if we have a project coming up, we know people are going to be available for it because we have a reputation for, paying top dollar and paying on time. So, our renovation cost might be a little bit higher than, another investment firm down the road, but we like to think it helps people, live better lives down there as well.
Definitely. And so are you engaging with local property managers there, or and how do you find them, and how do you vet them?
So when I first started going down there, and we're talking the 90s, mid 90s, so a
Hmm.
couple years ago, um, I've always been interested in real estate and everything else. That's what my family did growing up in California. So, like, the first property I bought in Mexico was a little 2-bedroom house right on the beach in Rosarita, just south of Tijuana. And then I started renting it out. And I would go there about every other month. I'd bring a bunch of Marine Corps buddies of mine down, and we'd have, a heck of a party on a weekend. Um, and then I started looking at other areas, word of mouth references. I would go in and actually talk to real estate agents and lawyers in their office. Um, the internet has definitely made that much, much easier. Because I started all this before, the internet was really a thing. People didn't have cell phones and all that. So it's definitely gotten a lot easier over the years. Now I've got a pretty good team going in um, Mexico. We've got a great team. Colombia, we've got a great team. We're actually looking at adding El Salvador and Argentina. Argentina, we're kind of watching because their economy is slipping a little bit. We got some Eastern European teams going, so but it's boots on ground, meeting them face to face. Go out, have dinner. A lot of
Hmm.
times we meet their families and everything, so we have a really really good idea of their nature, and if they're going to be a good fit to work with us before we start using them for our clients.
Okay. Okay. So let's do like a little bit of a visualization because I have lots of friends based in Canada and the States that they kind of know that there's higher returns in Latin America and they're involved in real estate in Canada and the US and they're down to throw some money at it. And so let's just say I can put together sort of like a family office fund or a family and friends fund and I could get 6, 7 figures to invest in Latin America. Are we looking to put together a US LLC? We wouldn't be putting it in someone's name, I guess, because it might be like a mixture of a couple different capital sources and whatnot. And then we're gonna work with a local lawyer. Sorry about that. We're gonna work with a local lawyer. Um, we're going to buy these properties through our US LLC. We're going to get a local property manager where, we're going to get it on Airbnb, hopefully. We can talk a bit about that. And then, so the cash flows that are coming in, where are they getting paid out to? Are they going to get paid directly to the US LLC or they're going through Mexico first? And then maybe you could just talk a bit about on the tail end, like the tax benefits that you alluded to of or owning foreign property. So just walk me through what that whole sort of cycle would look like.
Okay, so create a fund, US LLC. All the investors put their money in. We'll identify a property. Usually the investors will vote on it. Depends on how we set up the structure. Sometimes they don't really have a vote. Depends on how involved they want to be. Identify the property, purchase, renovate, and then start renting. And we typically do quarterly draws. So we'll pay out our investors quarterly. But we have a Mexican accountant. So that Mexican accountant will be like, okay, withhold such and such for Mexican taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And then the distributions will go out to our LLC in the US, where we again have to take some deductions out, US taxes and things like that for the LLC. And then it gets dispersed to the investors quarterly. And then they get a K1 at the end of the year that says, okay, this is going to be your taxable amount off your profit. And then they actually file that with their personal tax returns. So
Yeah, it definitely
it's
makes
kind of
sense. So it
a
sounds like the money.
convoluted, lots of paperwork process, but it's worth it because of the amount of money that they're making and how hands off it is.
Yeah, so we were talking about the process of just sort of like the flow of capital from basically from the renter all the way to the end investors. Um, and so sounds like it makes sense. A couple intermediaries, but ultimately, if the cash flow is coming in, it'll eventually make its way to investors.
Yeah, and
And
we
then
have we have the
if you
intermediaries in place just to make sure that we're staying compliant with local laws. Mexico or Colombia or wherever else we happen to be, as well as U.S. laws. Um, that's the biggest thing for me. There's no point in doing any of this if you're not above the board and doing it the legal way. I don't want to put
Mhm,
my investors at risk. I don't want to put myself at risk. So it's worth it to do it above board.
mhm. You have a guest.
Thank you, my dear. Coffee delivery.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And then, so if you were to sort of scale this up all the way to the point where you're basically like $1 billion REIT, real estate investment trust, how would the structure sort of change as you grow?
I don't know. I haven't honestly considered that because I don't want the real estate side of it to be that big. I enjoy doing the real estate. aspect of it. And we'll continue to do that into the future for some of our clients. But the main focus that we're doing right now is the residency, citizenship, and offshore incorporation.
Hmm. Awesome. Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
so
that's a good
we'll never be a
segue.
billion dollar REIT.
It's a good segue. But it's obviously super interesting to learn about the real estate, because I think that's a realization a lot of people have when they go to Latin America is they just see all these abandoned buildings and they're just like, oh, I should be able to pick this up for pennies or something, And
Absolutely.
um, to some extent, that's definitely true. We have a friend of mine that we interviewed on the podcast. His name is Sam Miller. I believe it's episode number
Oh, I know
4. Sam
Sam.
Miller. Hmm.
When Sam was in Medellin.
Yeah, so he at some point had like over
That's funny.
200 rental units. How do you know
Okay.
Sam?
Through Medellin,
Hmm.
when he was down in Medellin doing real estate.
And did you guys meet up in person at all?
No, just emails and stuff back and forth.
Okay, awesome. I think every single guest I've had like knows another guest somehow, and we've had
It's
a
a
big
small world,
Colombian
man.
contingent. So what do you know about Sam, and just kind of curious to close the loop on that, like how what have you guys talked about? And it's funny, he's been kind of getting out of the real estate and moving more into crypto.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm curious kind of what how you guys might have interacted.
So the group that he used to work for, the investment fund group, um,
Hmm.
we had talked several times about some of the projects that they were in Medellin. And
Hmm.
then when they were starting to open up the Santa Marta and Cartagena projects,
Hmm.
I
Yep.
had clients that were interested in those, and we were actually going back and forth for investment stuff. But then he ended up leaving that company.
Nice, because he's basically on sort of the property management end, or was, or his company
Was, yeah.
was, and then you would have been sort of the capital source for that, and then engaging with them.
Excellent, yeah. So last I heard, I have a Discord group that I'm in that he's part of, and last I heard, I think he was in Panama. Is he still in Panama?
He was in Mexico recently in Guadalajara just for like a little visit, and I think he's going back to Colombia at some point.
Okay.
Bit of a visa thing. I love Panama too. We should also talk about Panama. Um, but that's cool. Maybe you should like drop that Discord in the chat or something, or send it to me privately. I'd love to
Yeah,
get in
I
on
can
that.
send it privately.
Okay. That'd be awesome, because I do really want to, like, it's funny, I've been doing the residency thing in a couple different Latin American countries, but I never took a real estate route, and I or made any real estate investments, but I'm definitely getting there. I definitely feel like I have a good understanding of the culture at this point, connections, and I'm just starting to um, I guess just sort of like most of my business has been all online. But we want, and actually, the direction of My Latin Life is My Latin Life. We probably want to start going into a bit more of a real estate direction, definitely going into a more of a second passport and residency direction. And I look at companies like Live and Invest Overseas, and what's the other one? International Living. And
Nomad
ultimately,
Capital.
nomad capitalist, and we're kind of like the nomad capitalist for Latin America. And ultimately, where a lot of these companies or websites make money is by basically long-term funneling people into real estate investments, and that's sort of their like high ticket stuff on the back end.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely opportunity in the space for sure. And one thing I've considered for the real estate side of it is we've been putting a lot of people in Mexico, um, a few in Colombia, a few in Eastern Europe. So it'd be really nice to have like some real estate that was transitional housing for our clients, somewhere where they can
Hmm.
stay for 6 months and feel out the country and um, learn the culture and everything else. And they wouldn't have to find a place to live right away. So I think it could be beneficial for a lot of our clients.
Yeah. So I'm actually kind
Build a
of
little
curious
villa
what kind.
structure.
I'm curious what kind of clients you're actually sort of getting, and who's really interested in this stuff, because I feel like there's a lot of sort of younger digital nomad people that Maybe they're tech savvy. They have high paying jobs that are finally remote, and it just totally makes sense to come down to Latin America. But I feel like those people are a little bit more do it yourself. I know one of your most popular packages is sort of a do it yourself package. And then I think maybe on the more high end or maybe the older clientele, they want everything done for themselves. And so when I think about from my Latin life, like what we could offer, I'm not sure which demographic to offer to and how much of it would be sort of just like a pure information product versus like a hands-on relocation, engaging with, the local lawyers and that sort of stuff. So what are you seeing in terms of who's most interested in this? What's your client avatar?
So we do quite a bit of the DIY residency that we do for $1,500. Essentially, what that will get somebody is one-on-one communication with me, identify their interests, if they have any businesses, give them any potential tax pitfalls that they have to look out for, and basically a step-by-step on how to get their residency and avoid a lot of the bureaucracy. They're still paying all of their fees. They're still filing all their own paperwork. They're still making all their appointments at the consulate and at INM. But it gives people a lot more confidence to kind of take that first step on the journey. And I'd say that's probably 2/3 of our clients. The other third is people who have way more money than time. Once you get to a certain level, time is the most valuable commodity in the world. So for them to stop running their multi-million-dollar corporation, that they barely have time for anyways, to learn how to do a second residency, citizenship programs, offshore incorporation for tax reductions, they don't have the time to learn all that. So for them, it's much simpler to pay $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 to a professional company like ours to create a bespoke plan for them and literally from start to finish, get it done for them with very, very little involvement on their part, aside from the initial meetings where we determine what they really need.
Definitely makes sense. And for some of the most popular programs or most popular countries, which would be Mexico, Panama, Colombia, those probably be the top ones. I mean, there's a couple that would be maybe the slightly less popular, but also quite transparent. Uruguay, Chile. I'm not even sure what else. But for the most transparent ones, like a lot of it is on the consulate website and stuff. So where do you like, and in forums and stuff. So where do you find that the value add is, or where people get the most value out of it?
So a lot of people looking at the website, and half the time the website doesn't translate correctly, so a good chunk of it's still in Spanish. They're really hesitant about, how much money it's really going to cost them, how to fill out the forms correctly. So for $1,500, it's worth it to a lot of these people to just have somebody take them by the hand and walk them through all the steps and say, yes, you have to do this, you have to do this. That one really isn't necessary. You can kind of just leave it blank and it's still going to go through. It's LATAM. You know how it is, man. And then local contacts on ground of, hey, when you make your INM appointment, stay at this hotel. Maria's the front desk lady. She's going to take care of you. Tell her we sent you. Here's a number for a taxi cab driver. I trust this guy. He's going to get you back and forth to INM. People love that.
Definitely makes sense. And so it actually sounds pretty hands-on for $1,500. I was wondering if it was just like a video course or maybe like a once a week Zoom call, but it sounds like you make yourself pretty available to the clients.
So it starts with about a hour call where we kind of go through what businesses they have, how much assets they have that they need to move offshore, what their ultimate goals are, what country they would like to live in. Because a lot of people are like, I want to move offshore, and they don't have any idea where. They don't understand cultures. Colombian culture is very different from Mexico culture, which is very different from Ukraine culture, which is very different from Polish culture. So, we talk about different cultures, where they would fit in best, what type of people they like. I'm not, talking racist or stereotypical there, but Some people are really warm and bubbly, and other people are kind of, they want to feel people out a little while before they're invited over for family barbecue. They want to they take a little bit more time to build that relationship. And other people are they want to be your best friend 5 minutes after meeting them. That's perfect for them to go to LATAM. You know, so
Right.
figure out what countries are going to suit them best, how much time they actually want to spend in that country, because a lot of our clients aren't ready to move full time overseas yet. So we got to find a place like Mexico where you can get your permanent residency visa, but not have to live there.
Mm-hmm.
So, do that for 5 years, and then you can apply for citizenship.
And so when you obviously sort of hook up the clients with a fixer, a gestor, a sort of immigration consultant on the ground that does the heavy lifting in terms of interfacing with the consulate. Um, do you work with multiple per country or just one? And I know at least in Mexico, it's like quite different on a per sort of state basis. Like in Quintana Roo or Playa del
Mm-hmm.
Carmen, the immigration process is a little bit different than it might be in Baja California Sur or
Right.
Mexico City. Actually, quite different. And you'll probably need a different fixer or different immigration consultant depending on which state or region of the country you want to go to.
So we actually have an in-house team that's in the Tulum area, and they handle almost all of our stuff. So a lot of our clients, even if they don't plan to move permanently to that area, we still send them there to get all their paperwork and everything done, because that's where we have the most local contacts set up.
Okay, gotcha. And if you don't mind me asking, like, what is the business relationship between you and the local fixer immigration consultant? Do they give you like a fee? Like the client pays them directly, and then the fixer gives you like a referral fee, or how does that work?
No, they actually work for us.
Okay,
So we will pay them. So, um, say somebody gives us, the $1,500, and then the fees and payments for their residency. The $1,500 ones, they're not going to get very much from our local team. Um, they're just going to kind of be there to look out for them and call if they need to. But say it's the $15,000 one, our team's going to be down there, ensuring they get to and from their INM appointment. You know, Possibly even pick them up at the airport and get them to their hotel. It's almost like a concierge service.
right. Definitely makes sense. And I know the Tulum Playa del Carmen area quite well. I did mine in Quintana Roo. And so I know a couple of the companies there, be it Legally in Mexico, you might be aware of, is like the big one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a few others. I used a different one actually, and so I'm sort of like, if I was to sort of get more into this space, would I just work with them and maybe they'll give me like a kickback, or should I basically set up like a competing operation? That sounds like a lot of work. You know what I mean? So what was your thought process? And then how do you scale that on a per country basis?
I would absolutely set up your own thing. Get locals, get a local lawyer on board, get a local real estate agent on board, some local drivers, and then start advertising in U.S. and Canada and UK. I mean, we do a bunch for UK citizens moving down there as well,
Hmm.
and then scaling. You're basically just repeating the process in all the other countries. You're setting up the same type of team, weekly Zoom meetings and everything else. Make sure everybody's still on track. Hey, we got this client, this client coming up this week. Make sure this happens. Georgia, we got 2 clients coming your way. This is what they need. Um, uh, if you could make sure that they could get down to Banco Central and get their paperwork done, because we're doing the offshore thing for them, blah, blah, blah. So it's way easier when it's internal in your own team than trying to work with one of the established corporations and maybe getting a kickback.
Right,
And
because
it's not hard to set up your own team.
you're basically just saying here's their Facebook page and their email. Go for it, and then you say, hey, like I gave Joe your email, like give me $300. You know what I mean? And then you don't even you're not even capturing that client relationship really, and you have no control. So
Right.
yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why it's so much better to do your own team.
Definitely makes sense. So, Mexico and Colombia are definitely the most popular. El Salvador, I'm really excited to see what happens
Yes.
with with the Bitcoin one. Panama, sometimes I don't know how much I should say about my personal thing because I don't want to make it like my Latin life like a personal brand or whatever. But yeah, I've done the Panama one as well. I was lucky enough to get in before they just changed the rules a couple months
Hmm.
ago. So I got in by basically setting up a corporation that basically doesn't do much, and then you set up the corporation. You apply for the residency, and then you can sort of close down the corporation after the residency is accepted. That program doesn't seem to exist anymore. Now you have to do the 200K real estate investment.
Hmm.
Curious why you guys don't do Panama yet, because it makes sense. They use US dollars. They speak English very well. It's a pretty black and white program, or well established program. Have you looked into setting up in Panama, or is there a reason that you don't?
I'm not a fan of the Panamanian programs. Not that I'm not a fan of the country. I've had a lot of fun being down in that country. But their residency and citizenship programs, to me, were never worth the hassle and the expense. Um, One of the biggest reasons is most of my clients like to eventually get citizenship. That's one of the biggest reasons that we don't do anything really in the Asian countries, because you can get permanent
Mm-hmm.
residency, but you'll never ever get citizenship. So in
Yep.
Panama, for example, I know a bunch of people, probably 40, 50 people that have been there in excess of 10 years and have applied numerous times to get their citizenship and have been denied each time. So for
Oh
me,
wow.
it's
So
not a
not
program that
just
I want to support and tell my clients that, hey, let's sign up on this one, let's pay their fees, let's jump through their hoops. And, eventually you're going to get citizenship, where it doesn't seem to be that way. So ultimately, for most of my clients, citizenship is the goal, and I don't think they're going to get it in Panama.
Yes, you're correct that the citizenship process is what I've heard is that the thing is it just languishes and just sits there on the desk and doesn't get accepted. I didn't know people were getting like denied.
Yeah. So if they haven't got an answer back in a year, then it's a denial. So you have to reapply.
Interesting. I've never heard that.
Yeah. So you have to reapply yearly.
So what I like about Panama, though, even if from a citizenship perspective, that's a pretty unlikely outcome, is at least it's a territorial tax country.
True.
So I thought maybe for a second we could talk a bit about taxes. And what my big thing is in Latin America, you have probably about half the countries are territorial tax systems, and then half of them are standard sort of like residency based systems. It gets a little bit more nuanced than that on a per country basis. But my big issue with, say, something like Colombian residency is that at what point do you become like, at what point is it a legal residency versus a tax residency?
183 days.
Yeah.
So that's why I tell a lot of my clients, if you can stand at the threshold of that 183 days, and a lot of the countries in the world are like that. If you can stay underneath that tax threshold, then a lot of times you can avoid actually paying taxes in that country. A lot of countries won't tax you on offshore derived income. So, say you're in
Hmm.
Colombia and your business is online and you're getting paid from the UK. A lot of times you're not going to get taxed on that unless you spend more than 183 days in the country. So you've got to be really, really familiar with the tax laws for the countries that you're considering. Um, Present it to your accountant. So you should have an international accountant as well as a domestic one for whatever country you're residing the most in.
Hmm.
And then have everybody work together and come up with the best plan for you to pay the amount of tax you want to pay, which for some people might be zero, some people might be single digits, and other people are fine paying 30%. So you got to figure out the best way moving forward for you. Ensure that all your accountants and lawyers are on the same page, and that way you can get a plan set up. And that's one of the things that we do for like the bespoke clients, is actually work with either our accountants or their accountants if they already have them, and try to come up with the most tax advantageous situation for them.
Definitely makes sense. And so if someone was a permanent residency in Colombia, they may or may not own property, they're staying less than 183 days. Do they still have to file a return as a permanent resident?
It's LATAM, so legally, I believe you're supposed to, and I'd say 99.9% of people don't.
Yeah, makes sense. Um, Yeah, so maybe we could actually just run through like real quick. I know this could take a long time, but just run through what the programs are available in Mexico and Colombia, where it seems to be you have the most experience. So I can tell you that with Mexico, they have a couple different ones, but the most in I for Mexico, I got in on basically like the regularization program, which is sort of like if you overstay the 6 months, you can't go back to your home country. They can regularize you and basically give you like a temporary residency, and then
Mm-hmm.
after a couple of years, you can convert that to permanent, and then you can convert that to citizenship. Sounds like with that's not really sustainable for most people and might not even be around that long. Um, so sounds like the Mexico one is really about means and
Yes.
about, and I've heard that it could be sort of like a monthly income based one, or it could be sort of like a just like a
Assets in the bank.
like a assets in the bank one, yeah, and it's like 100 or 200K. So and then in Colombia, I think they also have the sort of income based one, but
Mm-hmm.
most popular seems to be investing in real estate or a corporation. Maybe you could just speak to those two programs real quick, or the two countries real quick.
So for the majority of our clients from Mexico, we do the means test one, like you were mentioning. Unfortunately, depending on what consulate you go to and how the official at the consulate is feeling that day, it could be anywhere from $2,500 to $4,500 per month that you need to prove in income. Generally, with 6 months of bank statements. And for the assets test, again, it depends on who you talk to. It is Latin America after all. Some officials will sign you off with as low as $100,000. Other officials aren't going to let you in unless you have $250,000. So
Mhm.
it's kind of luck of the draw who you get at the consulate that day. And then even if the consulate signs off on it, when you go to your I&M appointment, you're kind of hoping that they still sign off on it. So
So these people are applying from the US or Canada or their home country through the consulate.
yes, so that's the way that program works is you have to make an appointment at the consulate in your home country, whatever country you're a resident of or happen to be living in at the time. Give them, identity docs, 6 months of bank statements, generally a criminal background letter to make sure that you're, not a felon or anything in any of the countries. Then you're going to go to an appointment. They're going to verify all your paperwork. Some consulates require it to be translated and apostilled, and some of them don't. Um,
Hmm.
and then if the consulate approves your paperwork, then you have 30 days to get to Mexico and make an appointment at I&M. At I&M, they're going to verify all of your paperwork again, check it off, and then give you another appointment, usually 2 or 3 weeks later, to get your actual hard card permanent residency.
Makes sense. And when you say income of, two, three, 4,000 bucks, whatever it is that like passive income, or could that be like earned income? Because a lot of the programs in Latin America, it has to be sort of like a passive income source, or a what's the word? Like a consistent income source that's not based on earned income. Because pretty much everyone in the US is going to earn at least 4,500 bucks a month. But unless you're like retired or get like a CD or something, they might not have a guaranteed like passive income source.
So, in my experience, unless the official, and just with everything else in Latin America, it comes down to the attitude of the person that, the official that you're talking to that day. But the majority of the time, they don't really care the source of your income, as long as they can see a certain amount going into your bank account every single month, whether it's from investment dividends, pensions, retirement. or regular earned income. They just want to see a certain amount.
Right. If it's earned income, then pretty much everyone's eligible. But if it
Just
has to
about.
be, but if it has to be dividends or Social Security or whatever, it definitely limits the pool.
Yeah. So a lot of times, what some of our clients run into is they'll be asked, um, if you move to Mexico, are you still going to be earning the same amount of money?
Mm.
And of course, the answer to that is always yes.
Makes sense. And then real quick, we'll move to Colombia. So how does the Colombia one work?
So the Colombia one essentially is the same thing. It's a means test. You have to have a certain amount of income every single month, and it does go up yearly based on the minimum wage of the country.
Hmm.
Uh, and it's a lot like Mexico, where it depends on who you talk to. It can be as low as $1,600 and as high as 32. Although the most common that we do is actually the real estate investment portion,
Hmm.
where for about $100,000 you can get temporary residency that you have to renew in 5 years,
Hmm.
or for $250,000 US, you can get permanent residency that will convert to citizenship within a couple years. You just have to apply.
Hmm. And speaking generally for both Mexico and Colombia, if you get in on a temporary visa that might be 2 years or 4 years, how like guaranteed is that to convert to a permanent residency when you go to renew it?
We've never really had much issue with it, but honestly, we tend to pursue the permanent residency to begin with.
Hmm.
There's a few countries that will allow you to apply directly for the permanent residency without having to go through temporary residency first. So we
Hmm.
always recommend to our clients skip the temporary residency step.
Yeah, permanent's definitely way, way better.
Yeah, you essentially have all of the rights of a citizen other than voting.
Yep, definitely. Um, And then, so maybe you could speak to in Mexico. I think it's actually really, really interesting that you have a permanent residency in Mexico. I imagine you spend less than 180 days a year in Mexico, and you're going to be able to convert your permanent residency to citizenship, even though you're spending the majority of your year, I guess, in the U.S. That's awesome. Could you speak to that a little bit?
So Mexico is one of the few countries where if you get permanent residencies there, there's no residency requirement. So
Hmm.
several countries will allow you to get permanent residency, but then you have to spend more than 180 days there. Or there's some that won't let you out of the country for more than 2 weeks per year.
Right, Belize.
So for our clients, we always look at options where it has a lot more flexibility on residency. And Mexico has one of the most flexible in that you can get your permanent residency and then literally never go back for 5 years and then apply for citizenship.
That's crazy. So will that be your first your second passport? You'll finally
Yeah.
be a dual citizen?
Well, technically, I had Irish growing up,
Hmm.
citizenship by descent. But when I joined the military, because security clearance issues, I had to renounce my Irish citizenship. And I was like, oh, that's no big deal. I'll just apply for it again after I get out. Well, it turns out that if you renounce it, you can never get it back.
No
So I was a
way.
little disappointed on that one.
No way. I didn't know
Yeah.
that. I have some Irish descendancy in my family too.
If your grandfather, if you can prove that your grandfather came from Ireland, has a birth certificate there, or church records there, then you can get your Irish citizenship, and it's about an 18-month process right now.
Uh-huh. My mom is the I'm the great grandchild. My mom is the grandchild, so I helped her get hers.
There
I
you
didn't
go.
know she
Perfect.
can. Yeah, I didn't know she can't renounce though.
Yeah. Yeah. If you renounce, you're not getting it back.
Damn. Okay. Learning a lot on this episode. I think people are going to get a lot of value out of this episode.
I hope so.
Um, that's awesome. And so you think on the Columbia one, so I make income online, but it's basically earned income. I'm a software developer is my main job. Do you think I could get the Columbia rentista style one using the earned income?
Again, it comes down to how the official that you're talking to feels. But we've had several clients able to do it off of earned income from online sources.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, and Colombia is a good place. I'm not a huge fan of the where the government seems to be heading, and then they instituted all of the restrictions and whatnot for vaccinations and travel and everything else. I'm not a fan of that. I think that's going to seriously hurt their tourism. But we'll, wait a few years and see what happens from that.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about Colombia and Mexico in this episode, and I also want to be respectful of your time. We've already hit the hour mark, but if you don't mind going like another like
No,
15
yeah, no,
minutes
we're fine.
maybe. Um, so I guess some of the other most popular programs and or countries in Latin America for expats and for residency programs would be Panama, which we've talked about, Costa Rica, which we should mention. Paraguay is a big one. I mentioned Uruguay and Chile briefly. Ecuador seems to be okay as well. And then all the Central American countries are kind of interesting because most of them are territorial tax systems, and then probably pretty loose in terms of like the getting in and stuff like that. Have you looked at like expanding or doing stuff in say Guatemala or any of the countries that I've or Costa Rica or any of the countries that I've mentioned?
Yeah, we've looked at Costa Rica. We've actually put a few clients there. It's an okay program. You have to do temporary residency and then permanent residency and then eventually possibly citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. But there's a few things that I really like about Costa Rica. Um, Two in particular, there's no mining allowed in the entire country. So they're very big on preserving their natural resources. And two, Costa Rica doesn't have an army.
Yep.
So they're not going to go out and start picking fights with other countries and causing problems for citizens like, a few other countries in the world do. So I'm a big fan of that. The other country that we look at quite a bit is Argentina. We put a few people in Buenos Aires.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, they're kind of in a decline, headed the same route as Venezuela. Uh, but in the meantime, there seems to be a few opportunities that people earning in dollars and spending in pesos can take advantage of. I don't know necessarily that it would be a long term 5 to 10 year plan down there, but there's some good opportunity down there right now for sure.
Yeah, if you can come with US dollars to Argentina, you're killing it. You're
Yeah.
you're you're living life. I've looked at the Argentine program a bit. It's pretty famous for being a country where once you get residency, you can apply for citizenship within 2 years, which is pretty crazy.
But
How
you also
much
have to
like
live there for that entire 2 years.
yeah, so I was going to ask you a bit about that. So how would that work in terms of and Argentina is actually pretty livable as long as you have cash. Um,
Yeah.
um,
It's a little cold for me, though. Like most of
yeah,
Argentina is cold.
I mean the north is warm as hell. They've had like 45-degree weather and fires. The other thing is it's since it's the opposite of North America. Our winter is their summer, so
Yeah.
it's kind of a good yin and yang. But what would think? But I think no one wants to be part of the Argentine tax net. They've had like wealth taxes and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Um, what have you seen from like a residency perspective there?
So a lot of times, if you have offshore earned income run through an offshore company, say a Belize, a BVI, a Seychelles, a lot of your income will not be taxable in Argentina. So that's how a
Okay.
lot of people are getting around that. Personally, I believe that if if you can do it without a whole bunch of paperwork or serious injury to yourself, you should pay a little bit of tax in the country that you're living in. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying you should pay 30 or 40 or 50% like what the U.S. wants. The single digits I think is fine. If you're paying 5% or 8 or 9, to the country that you're living in, I don't see anything wrong with that. So a lot of times you can structure your taxable income through offshore incorporation, so that way you can get that single digit. Or
Hmm.
they might be charging you 12 or 18% in tax, but when you look at your overall income, it's actually more like 3% because
Hmm.
the way it was structured overseas and how much you're transferring into country.
And at what point is it viable to go offshore with a business? Because I'm super down with going offshore in terms of residencies, passports, actually living there. But I kind of just feel like I'm down to just have the US LLC, pay the whatever 15% it is, reduce that taxable income by having lots of expenses and stuff like that. So there's not a lot of like actual, profit. At what point would you suggest that like incorporating offshore in BVI or Belize or whatever makes sense? Because there's a lot of fees. I know with Panama, I wanted when I created that sort of like paper company in Panama to open a bank account, like the it was going to cost like $1,000 just to open the bank account and stuff like that. And there's all these like insane fees. So like, at what point does it make sense, and who does it make sense for?
So what I tell clients is if your net profit after every single expense you can possibly take is more than $250,000, and you're paying at least 28% in taxes, incorporate offshore.
Okay, 250K and 20%.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Other than that,
And
if you're under that amount, it's not worth the hassle and the hoops that you have to jump through. And like what you were mentioning, the fees for everything. Like I can
mhm,
set somebody up a Seychelles corporation. It's going to cost them $7,500, and then another $8,500 for banking and some other documents, and basically getting everything set up. So you're at about $14,000.
mhm,
Well, if you're not paying out at least $50,000 a year in taxes that you want to avoid, then why would you spend that much money? It's not a very good
makes
ROI.
sense. Definitely makes sense. And then what about like payment processing? Because Stripe is not going to work in a lot of these countries.
Um, Stripe will work. It's not like the Caribbean ones. The Caribbean ones kind of have a really bad rap right now, and a lot of countries don't want to work with them. But Seychelles and BVI, you can still get most of the payment processors. UK, particularly, if a lot of your money is sourced out of the UK, their payment processors are actually even more friendly with them.
Okay. No, this is definitely helpful. I think yeah, this is definitely a much more advanced topic. I'm personally not there in terms of having a company making bank like that, but I definitely like at some point if you're making a lot of money, you just sort of put it in front of lawyers and you say like, how do we pay less by like
Right?
doing random admin things, and whatever happens, I guess.
In my experience, a lot of people will do that, but they make the mistake of handing it to U.S. lawyers and accountants who are going to
Mm,
find a few loopholes to save you 8 or 12% in tax. Whereas if they handed it to an offshore lawyer and accountant, they literally could reduce their taxable liability to zero in some cases.
right.
Now
And
they're
would you
going to pay a
say
little bit on
that
their
for
personal, but they can get 0% for business.
And would you say that for an American with someone with an American company, it's different than people from other places in terms of where is the best place to incorporate or move offshore? Are Americans special?
Not really. The only thing that really sucks about being an American is citizenship based taxation rather
Right,
than residency based taxation. So no
right.
matter where you're at in the US and how you're earning your money, Uncle Sam wants a chunk. Now you can mitigate a lot of that by the uh,
Foreign earned
foreign
income.
earned income exclusion, owning a home overseas where you can, as long as you don't use it as a rental, you can claim a portion of the payments. So your first $118,000 is not taxable under the earned income exclusion for foreigners, right? So in order to take advantage of most of the tax abatements, you have to move offshore. So your business and your person has to be offshore. If you want to keep living in the U.S., you're going to pay U.S. taxes. So what a lot of my clients are doing is incorporating offshore, paying themselves a salary of 120, $150,000, something like that, and then the first 118,000 is actually tax free
Right,
as long as you're living outside the U.S. So they're not paying tax on that; they're paying taxes on a very, very small percentage. Um, or if their company's not making a lot of money, they might pay themselves 90,000, and the entire thing's tax exempt. and then they have a house overseas as well. So that's, exempts them from some taxes. So there's ways around it for US for sure, but there's a lot more hoops and crap we have to jump through with the IRS, a lot of forms to file. We have to report all of our offshore bank accounts, offshore investments, offshore properties.
So how does the tax or how does the house thing work? So you have a foreign house. I have a house in Mexico. I have a house in Panama. Whatever. What's the benefit there?
So you can claim as a loss your payments on that house as long as you're living in it full time and you haven't rented it out. As soon as it becomes an investment property, then it's no longer tax deductible.
And is that like mortgage payments, or could that be sort of like the more normal, heat and electricity payments, or
Yeah,
what
anything you're paying for that house. So most people won't be able to get a mortgage on an overseas house
right?
unless had permanent residency or citizenship for a few years and you manage to establish credit. So what's going to be deductible is taxes, insurance, utilities, any maintenance costs if you remodeled, stuff like that.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. And if you were to Airbnb it, would that get around that at all, or?
Absolutely not. So if you turn it into an investment property and you rent it out at all, you lose all tax deductions on it.
Okay, okay, that's still cool though. I didn't know about this.
Hmm.
And then on the foreign earned income, I have a bit of like a nuanced question. If you don't know it, it's fine. But so I know about the foreign earned income that, a lot of people just say as long as you spend less than 30 days, you can claim the foreign earned income exclusion, bing, bam, boom. But when you go to actually fill out the paperwork, there's a lot of emphasis on the tax home and having an address in a foreign country and sort of what qualifies as a tax home in a foreign country is a little bit nuanced, right? Like if you have, say, a residency in Latin America, but you're not actually paying taxes there because you're spending less than 180 days, and it's just sort of like almost like a paper residency. It's not really a tax home. You might not even have a tax number in that country. So, like, what do but a tax home seems to be a requirement in order to file for FEIE, foreign earned income exclusion. Uh, do you know what I'm talking about, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and a lot of times you're not going to get the earned income exclusion if you haven't spent more than 6 months overseas. And a lot of times they want to see 48 weeks.
Right. I mean, let's just say you did the like, because I know there's the physical presence test, and there's the bona fide resident test, I believe
Right.
it's called, right? So let's just say you did the physical presence, and you actually spent less than 30 days a year in the States. You still actually, and people say as long as if it's bona fide, then you obviously definitely need a tax home. But if it's the physical presence and you're less than 30 days, then you don't really. Then some people say like you don't need a foreign tax home. But when you go to fill it out, you do kind of you still need a
Yeah.
foreign tax
So
home. You
we'll
know what I
use
mean?
Mexico as an example. If you spend more than 183 days in Mexico, then you're a tax resident. Same thing for
Hmm.
Colombia. Same thing for most of Eastern Europe. So you're going to owe taxes in that country that you've been living and working in. So the taxes that you pay to that country are actually deductible against your U.S. taxes.
No, and I definitely get that because I mean I was
Okay.
an American living in Canada for a long, long time, and so I would file a U.S. return, but I was paying mad taxes in Canada anyway. But then when you reach a point where you go abroad, maybe you can do the digital nomad thing. You can spend less than 6 months in every country, maybe like a month per country, right? But you're still outside the U.S. And then you meet the physical presence test. You're spending less than 30 days in the U.S., maybe you have a couple residencies abroad, but none of them is like really like a tax home. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So how does that work?
So I think your tax residency would still be the U.S. at that point, but that's the reason to have a really good international accountant.
Yeah.
So you can be like, hey, I spent freaking 48 weeks overseas this year and no more than 6 weeks in one country. So here's all my paperwork. Figure it out for me.
Right. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think I shouldn't even get into this whole. Well, I will like get into the whole like hand holding residency thing. And I feel like I should just create like a software startup that's basically like a TurboTax for international tax and for digital nomads and stuff.
If you could, I think there would be an audience for it. There's a lot of nuances though, so it'd be hard to do in software. But if you could figure it out, I got a whole line of clients that would be there to buy it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think bottom line, there's the population of digital nomads and people internationalizing themselves is just going to continue to grow every year. I think we're
Yeah,
going to get to the point where literally like half the planet works location independent, and
God, wouldn't
you
that be
know,
nice?
and yeah, there's just basically unlimited opportunity. One or two last questions, just burning questions I had. So, if you did the Colombia one, and you did the temp or permanent residency, if you spent less than 6 months a year, could you still get Colombian citizenship? Is there a physical presence requirement for the Colombian citizenship?
They're supposed to be, but it's actually not enforced, and it hasn't been enforced for over a decade.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Hmm.
Because the best countries are the ones with no physical presence requirement.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna. I think there's actually a lot of countries that have programs that just no one really like talks about. Like I bet you know
How
what I
about
mean.
yeah, where you can do CBI for as low as $5,000?
In Armenia
Yeah, which is an amazing, beautiful country, some of the best food in the world, and great people.
and Nomad Capitalist has done something in Armenia. What is the Armenia one, real quick?
So the CBI one, the country when it drafted up its citizenship by investment program didn't put in an amount.
Okay,
So literally, if you can say, "Hey, I'll send you $5,000, and you're going to give me my permanent residency for 3 years, which is going to turn into citizenship automatically," and that's how you fill out the paperwork. 9 times out of 10, it's accepted.
that's crazy because Armenia, and then also Georgia are neighbors. They're right there, and they both have like pretty cool programs. So I feel like, especially for Europeans, but really for anyone, just take a little trip over to the Caucasus Mountains, whatever the fuck,
Right?
and
Caucasus
just do
Mountains.
both of these programs like bing bam, like back to back.
Yeah, open a bank account in each. So here's another really cool thing about Armenia. We just put $100,000 into the National Bank of Armenia for a client, where it's
Mm-hmm.
earning 10% interest, and
Mm-hmm.
that bank has a better rating than half the U.S. banks.
Mm-hmm.
So they're making 10% on money, and it's not locked up. They can withdraw at any time. They can spend out of that account. It's a normal checking account, but they're making 10% interest.
And I think it's fair to say that like a lot of countries actually have really good returns on certificates of deposit and
Yep.
things like that. Why is no one doing that? Like why don't, let's just say like you're J.P. Morgan and you have like mad cash sitting. Like why are people not putting their cash in these smaller countries where you can get a 10% return for it just sitting there?
JP Morgan does do it with your money, but by
Yeah,
federal law, they can only have so much in foreign investment.
right. But
So
like,
yeah, they're absolutely
why not
doing it.
just
Only
start a
problem.
hedge fund? Just start, you know what I mean? A hedge fund is doing all this work to make like an 8% return. Like, why don't they just like have it sit in Armenia or Paraguay or whatever and make 10%?
Yep, they should. But if it's a U.S. based fund under the SEC, you're limited in how much foreign investment you can have in the fund itself.
Mm-hmm. Or yeah, or investments or yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, yeah, and I think actually those are some of the most attractive residency programs. There's not too many of them where it's basically just a bank deposit because it's just so much easier than like the proving the income or buying the real estate or whatever. If you can just put money in a bank and then like you get residency, like that's so easy. Like, and I feel like to the extent that we can uncover some of those programs, like it's
Uh-huh.
just so much easier.
Well, another good one is the ones that are real estate, but don't have an amount that you have to buy. Okay. So a good
Mm.
example of that is Montenegro. Montenegro is a beautiful country. you could buy a seaside villa for $30,000 right now.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're paying attention to world politics, Russians are getting blocked all over the world for investments and access to funds and everything else, right? The
Mm-hmm.
majority of money that's in Montenegro is Russian. So that
Mm-hmm.
$30,000 villa is probably going to be like 15 or 20K now within 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And if
Mm-hmm.
you buy any amount of real estate in that country, you get citizenship. Well, you get permanent residency.
Mm-hmm.
So for a $15,000 or $20,000 investment, you can get a beautiful seaside villa in a nice warm island and a residency permit.
Mm-hmm.
So it pays to pay attention to all of these little programs and kind of off the beaten wall things.
Yep. Yep. Definitely. Yeah, this has been really, really interesting. Yeah, I knew you were going to be a good guest, and it sounds like
Thank
we
you.
both agree on a lot of things. And I think people listening to this definitely got a lot of value out of it. And sometimes it just helps to hear people talking about it because you can read a couple blog posts or whatever, but just sort of the back and forth, it definitely helps crystallize in people's minds that it's very, very doable. There's a million different ways to do it. And even sometimes the rules themselves can be a little bit flexible and they're just sort of up to
Mm-hmm.
the guy you get that's stamping the paperwork.
Absolutely. And that's what we try to tell a lot of our clients is, just because it says that it's done a certain way on the website, um, most of the time in LATAM, it's not. There is always a back door. There is always a way around shit. It's still legal. I mean, it's absolutely legal above the board. But it's Latin America. There's always a way around it.
One last question. So I think people might find residencies a little bit scary. In terms of like tax consequences, or also just like at what point it, or like I guess my question is, at what point is can you have too many? Like, why not just stack all 20? And are there any of the residencies that you, especially in Latin America, that you would categorically avoid?
Um, the thing that you got to watch out with having multiple residencies is making sure that there's tax treaties in place so you don't get double taxation. Because
Mm-hmm.
there's no point in doing all of this if you're going to pay 3 times as much in tax because each country wants its cut, right? So you
Right.
got to be really careful of that. Because some of them don't have the 6 month litmus test. If you're a resident of that country, you're going to pay taxes whether you spend a day in that country or
Yeah.
365 days in that country. So you got to be really, really aware of your tax implications.
I only know
The
of
other thing
Brazil
is,
in that case.
there's a few countries I wouldn't go into. Venezuela, for one. Um, there's some that I wouldn't do just personally because I don't think the program's worth it, but there's nothing really wrong with the country. Um, like Belize, I think is pretty overrated. The program used to be really, really good, and then too many people utilized it, and now it's nowhere near as good as it used to be. Panama's the same way. Their friendly nations visa used to be a really, really good travel document, um, and an easy path to tax abatement and everything. And over the years, because it got so popular, it got really watered down. Um, Mexico, I still think is the number one opportunity in the Americas for even UK, but anybody that's in the US or Canada, Mexico is absolutely your number one option. It's a beautiful country. The people are amazing. The food is the best in the world. It's cheap. The residency program isn't particularly bureaucratic. It's fairly easy process to get done. So that's probably one of the reasons we put so many people into Mexico. Is it's
Mm-hmm.
really the best program going in the Americas.
Mm-hmm.
And I
And
prefer Mexico over anywhere in the world. I like to joke and tell people it's because you can't get a good taco in Georgia, Tbilisi.
I heard Georgia food is really good.
Yeah,
Um,
Georgian food's amazing, but they don't have
yeah,
tacos.
correct. So so the Mexico one, obviously we know it's cheap and good food, but like, What is it about the Mexican program itself once you have it that's so good? It obviously the physical presence requirements are extremely generous and good. Is there any other aspect of it that people aren't seeing?
The fact that the country says in 5 years of permanent residency you can get citizenship and then actually does it. A lot of these countries will say 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, then you can get citizenship, and it will never happen.
Hmm.
Mexico is, and that's why I say it's not that bureaucratic in the fact that they'll actually follow through and do what they say. Yeah, are you going to run into the siesta time and when you try to get paperwork done at a government office at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and they're going to turn you away because they don't feel like working anymore for that day? Yeah. But after 5 years, they're going to process your application and give you citizenship. Now, you have to meet certain requirements. You have to understand the Constitution. You have to speak at least passable Spanish. You have to know some Mexican history. That's not hard. So I think that's one of the things I like the best is they actually follow through with what they said they're going to do.
How many, and anecdotally, like how many gringos do you know that have gotten Mexican citizenship?
Thousands.
Oh, wow.
Because I've been going down there since the 90s.
Hmm.
So I've met quite a few that have gone through. And, there's always those that go down there and do the perpetual tourist visa and just, every 6 months hop out of the country for a day and then drive back through. There was a bunch of those doing that. They're finally cracking down on that. I'm not a fan of when people were doing that, but each to their own. But Mexico's finally cracking down on that, so a lot more people are going to get their residency and then citizenship.
That's awesome.
Essentially my goal, because I make really good money in person in the U.S. through real estate sales, through commercial real estate. So it's hard to walk away from that income source, especially since the offshore business is kind of still in its infancy. I got some clients, but it's definitely not like full time income yet.
Hmm.
Whereas the real estate it's a substantial income. So my plan is for the next 3 years to grow the offshore business so I can do that from anywhere in the world and slowly wind down the real estate business. And that way in 3 years, I can be full time in Mexico. And then part of the year in Eastern Europe and stuff like that, because I like to travel. But, you know, 3 years be done with the US and actually living overseas full time. And then probably
Yeah,
within
man.
a few years of that, I'll renounce US citizenship.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Yeah, we'll have to get a beer at some point.
Right?
I mean, my what I joke about to my friends is that I'll get Mexican citizenship and then I'll be like the only dude with Canada, US, and Mexico, get the whole NAFTA going.
Right? I hate that NAFTA thing because I want to import my Jaguar down there and they won't let me do it.
Right, I can because I'm on the temporary visa, but once you have the permanent, you can't.
Uh huh. Yep. I cannot bring my car down there.
Yeah,
And I
buy
can't
me.
drive a US plated vehicle in Mexico as a permanent resident.
Right.
So I can't even drive my car down there.
One last kind of like value question, and sorry, but do you know any other Latin countries where as soon as you're a resident, you're paying tax regardless of the physical presence, regardless of the 180 days? I only know of Brazil, where once you get
Mhm.
Brazilian residency, you have to pay tax. Do you know any other ones? Because to me, that's a country to avoid.
I believe Peru or Peru or Chile is the same way. One of those two. I group those together. To me, that's the Europe of South America, just because
Hmm.
of the way that those countries feel and kind of progressive tax laws. Um, One of those three will charge you tax as a permanent resident. Will charge you taxes whether you spend a day there or 365 days there. I think two of them, though, you're not allowed to leave for more than 2 weeks at a time, or 2 weeks total in a year when you have permanent residency. But I'd have to go back and look at the individual programs. I don't put a lot of people down there, and they're not on my radar, so I forget a lot of the requirements. But remember it being something like that down there for those three.
Hmm. And I have a buddy that I interviewed on the podcast. It's not out yet. His name's Adil Math. It'll come out soon, and he does the Brazilian program. And he says that he knows lots of gringos down there, and they somehow like don't pay tax really, even though they have the permanent residency. But still, I don't really like the gray area stuff. I want to
Yeah,
sleep well at night.
exactly. Yeah, that's what we always recommend as well. Pay at least a little bit in tax somewhere. It's good for your karma.
Definitely, man. Well, yeah, I'd say we're pretty much at the end of the episode. This has been a super good one. So if you have anything that you want to promote, any words for the audience, now's the time.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So my website is Offshore Consulting Group LLC.com. I'm sure Vance can throw up a link or something like that. My Twitter, I'm going to have to go look at this because I have no idea what my Twitter handle is. My Twitter is at Martin Toomey 13, and that's where I put all of my business stuff. I do a lot of posts about different countries and what's going on. It's a good place to stay up on what's going on in the world for residencies and citizenship and offshore incorporation. So, other than that, you can reach me at either one of those, and I look forward to working with any of your audience.
Audience.
Yeah, I couldn't come up with that word. I have a
Yeah, and
client.
yeah, and I'll put all the links in the show notes, so we'll link to your website and all that stuff.
Cool. I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Awesome.
Appreciate you
Thanks,
having me
Martin.
on.
Absolutely, man. This has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Hope everyone has enjoyed. Please comment, subscribe, keep in touch, because we're going to episode 100, baby, and it's going to be all like this, and it's going to be awesome. So, yeah, hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.